Good evening and greetings from Kuala Lumpur. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of this webinar, that is Solidaridad Japan, and the Institute for Sustainable Supply Chains, for the invitation to speak at this first webinar in the series on sustainability in commodity supply chains, which is being held in conjunction with the launch of Solidaridad Japan. My talk is on the production and use of sustainable palm oil, with particular reference to three major certification systems for palm oil. That is, the RSPO, a Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, ISPO, the Indonesian Sustainable Palm Oil, and MSPO, the Malaysian Sustainable Palm Oil Certification Scheme. Topics to be covered in my talk are shown in this slide. In my talk, you will hear two terms, oil palm and palm oil. Oil palm refers to the crop, to the plant that produces the fruit, which is processed in the mill to produce the product, that is palm oil. This slide summarizes the global production of 17 major oilseed fats, which in 2019 amounted to about 235 million tons, of which palm oil was the biggest contributor, accounting for about 32% of global production, and it has maintained its dominant position for many years. With regard to production of palm oil, Indonesia and Malaysia collectively account for about 83 to 85% of the global production. Production in these two countries has increased steadily and significantly since the 1980s, especially Indonesia, which is the world's largest producer of palm oil. Global consumption of palm oil in 2019 was about 79 million tons. The largest consumers are Indonesia, India, the EU, and China, which collectively account for more than 50% of the global consumption. Japan consumes about 0.8 million tons, which is about 1% of the total consumption. Two-thirds of the palm oil consumed was for food uses, especially for cooking oils, and about 24% of it is used for production of renewable energy, such as biofuels and biodiesel. If you go to the supermarket today, you may not realize that more than 50% of the products on the shelves contain palm oil as an ingredient. Next, let us look at the sustainability of palm oil, what I term the palm oil sustainability debate, which has been going on for about 20 years. The discourse probably started after the great forest fires in the late 1990s, when large areas of land in Southeast Asia and other countries caught fire as a result of the El Nino. And palm oil has been implicated as one of the major factors causing the fires and air pollution. The discussion on oil palm sustainability since then has covered all aspects of cultivation of the crop, the economic aspects, environmental, social, and governance of the sector. Discussion usually covers or focuses on delinking palm oil from deforestation, greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, opening of peatland, and loss of biodiversity. On the social aspects, there was concern over exploitation of the local communities and labor. There's also concern about chemical pollution and the traceability of the product from the farm to the consumers. In recent years, palm oil has become one of the most vilified commodities in the world. In fact, it was even called the world's most hated crop in one publication. So what are the options for consumers and the supply chain? What are the solutions? Should you consider stopping use of palm oil, as called upon by several campaigns by NGOs? Or should you consider using sustainable palm oil that have been produced sustainably according to the requirements of the major certification schemes such as RSPO, Rainforest Alliance, ICC, or national standards such as MSPO and ISPO? Is boycotting of palm oil a sustainable option? In my opinion, it is not, from two perspectives. First is from the comparison of the productivity of the major oil crops. Compared with the other competing oils of soybean, rapeseed, and sunflower, oil palm is the most productive crop, producing about 4 tons of oil from 1 hectare of land, which is about 9 to 10 times more than 1 hectare of soybean. According to an IUCN study, oil palm accounted for 6.6% of the total land used by the 4 major crops, but it accounted for nearly 39% of the total production of these crops. The other perspective is on increasing global demand. If we use a benchmark of 30 kilograms per capita consumption, then there are many countries in the world that are consuming below this benchmark, including China and India. With a growing middle class in these countries, as well as growing population, there will be an increasing demand for oils and fats. And palm oil is expected to play a dominant role as it is the cheapest oil. What do we mean by sustainable palm oil? How do we define it? According to a multi-stakeholder consensus that was reached in 2004, sustainable palm oil is comprised of legal, economically viable, environmentally appropriate, and socially beneficial management and operations, often referred to as the 3 Ps, which is impact on people, planet, and prosperity. In recent years, the definition of sustainable palm oil has been further refined and strengthened to reflect the commitments of the supply chain and global companies to no deforestation, no peat exploitation, and no exploitation of workers and communities. This slide shows the production of certified sustainable palm oil according to the requirements of the RSPO. The first CSPO was produced in late 2008, and currently about 15 million tons of CSPO is being produced globally, which amounts to about 19% of global palm oil production. In terms of area, it accounts for 14% of the total production area in the world. The annual production and uptake of CSPO is shown here. The blue charts refer to the annual production, while the brown charts refer to the uptake of CSPO. Unfortunately, there has been a large gap between production and uptake of CSPO by the market over the years. In 2011, the RSPO embraced a new vision of transforming the global palm oil market and making sustainable palm oil the norm. Ambitious targets were set for uptake for CSPOs by various consuming countries by 2020. To understand the transformation of an agricultural commodity sector such as palm oil by a voluntary standard such as RSPO, let us use the model developed by New Foresight. This transformation model has 4 stages, starting at inception, followed by adoption by the first movers of the new standards, then reaching critical mass in the 3rd stage, whereby a tipping point is achieved before it moves on to the final stage of institutionalization or transformation of the sector. In the case of RSPO, inception started in 2004 with the formation of RSPO as a multi-stakeholder organization and the adoption of the first standard, the PNC 2007, for production of sustainable palm oil. The first movers, comprising of the larger plantation companies, started to produce palm oil according to the requirements of RSPO standard and achieved the first CSPO production in 2008. As production of sustainable palm oil using RSPO grain traction, it reached the critical mass, whereby currently about 19% of the global production has been produced using the RSPO principles and criteria. However, in order to transform the market, the tipping point at this stage should be about 20 to 25%. So a lot of work has to be done before RSPO standard could reach the transformation stage. So what needs to be done to step up and scale up the production of certified sustainable palm oil? Besides the RSPO, other instruments would be needed, such as use of other voluntary standards, use of responsible sourcing codes by consuming companies, national standards, as well as mutual recognition of standards. As it is, many grower companies undertake multiple certification of their production units. Harmonization of standards could lead to better efficiency and accelerate the transformation of the sector. When comparing sustainability standards, we should consider their potential impacts in terms of their reach and inclusivity. Are they aimed at raising the floor of sustainability performance by the entire sector, or are they trying to reach for the ceiling? With national standards, which are mandatory, it will mean that application of the standards will ensure all producers, both plantations and smallholders, comply with the minimum standards for sustainable production. In the case of voluntary standards such as RSPO and ISCC, being B2B platforms, the overall performance will be very dependent on the demand from the consumers. This is even more so with voluntary standards with more stringent requirements. In terms of inclusivity, national standards are more inclusive as it involves all players producing product, whereas the most stringent standards tend to cater for the niche market. Numerous benchmark studies have been undertaken to compare the credibility and performance of various sustainability standards. Some of these publications are listed in this slide. Those which compare the performance of ISPO, MSPO, and RSPO, which are the subject of this talk, are given in bold. This slide provides an overview of the RSPO, ISPO, and MSPO certification system. RSPO is a voluntary sustainability standard that is applied globally, whereas ISPO and MSPO are mandatory national standards for Indonesia and Malaysia. To achieve certification, growers must comply with a set of principles and criteria, which outline the conditions and requirements for legal compliance and performance against social, environmental, and economic indicators. RSPO's PNC was first adopted in 2007, was revised in 2013, and again in 2018. ISPO started later in 2011 and has just been revised this year, whereas MSPO was adopted in 2013 and is undergoing revision now. It's of interest to note that RSPO's PNC was the catalyst and provided the framework for the development of the ISPO and MSPO principles and criteria. RSPO and MSPO also has a supply chain certification system. Progress made by the three certification systems in terms of areas under certification are shown in this slide. RSPO has to date certified about 14% of the global production area of oil, whereas Indonesia has certified 5.25 million hectares under ISPO, or equivalent to 32% of the plantation area, and MSPO has certified 5.05 million hectares, equivalent to about 86% of the total planted area. Based on results of the benchmark studies, how does the ISPO and MSPO standards compare with RSPO based on the 2013 principles and criteria? First of all, we must note that all the comparative studies are based on desk studies with varying objectives and rigor of analysis, and they mainly focus on the environmental and social schemes rather than across the board all the requirements of the standards. Therefore, it is difficult to make very clear comparisons but broad observations are as follows. On the similarities, all three standards have similar scopes covering legal aspects, economic, social, and environmental requirements. On verification of compliance against the PNC, these are conducted independently by certification bodies. However, ISPO is perceived to be less transparent than the other two. On legality, ISPO and MSPO are seen to have a better level of assurance because it's driven by compliance to all legal laws and regulations. It's often referred to as legal standards. However, comparing the environmental requirements, there are varying requirements for deforestation, but ISPO is seen to have the strongest requirements, especially in the protection of high conservation value forests. On social aspects, RSPO is also seen to have stronger requirements, especially they are required to have comprehensive social impact assessment and application of the free prior informed consent process. On economic dimensions, MSPO is seen to have stronger requirements on plantation management. With regard to overall implementation, RSPO is perceived to be more difficult for smaller producers and smallholders, while RSPO and MSPO are more practical to implement. Last year, the IUCN conducted a study of performance RSPO based on PNC 2018 against 5 other standards, including MSPO and ISPO, with particular reference to biodiversity protection and level of protection. The results clearly showed that RSPO 2018 was the strongest standard in terms of biodiversity protection and the level assurance. However, it should be noted that RSPO 2018 principles and criteria had incorporated the NDPE requirements, whereas ISPO and MSPO are still aligned to the RSPO 2013 framework. Nevertheless, the RSPO 2018 standards should serve as a benchmark for strengthening national standards. Next, let's look at efforts being made to strengthen the national standards. With regard to ISPO, the review process started in June 2016, and in March this year, the President promulgated the Presidential Regulation No. 44 to enhance the ISPO certification system. Several measures have been introduced. These included giving greater independence to certification bodies to verify the issue ISPO certificates. A new principle on application of transparency has been added on to the principles and criteria, and the standards will be made mandatory for all smallholders by 2025. A national action plan has also been formulated to support implementation of the new standard, but the revised standards have not been met with satisfaction by the civil society. The MSPO process is undergoing review at present, following a multi-stakeholder approach, and is expected to be completed by early next year. Strengthening of the national standards also has been supported by policy commitments by the government. This included limiting the total oil palm area to 6.5 million hectares. This should reduce the pressure on deforestation. There will be prohibition on new planting of oil palm on peatland, and banning of conversion of permanent forests into oil palm other crops, as well as making available official maps on planted areas to enhance transparency. On institutional support, the Malaysian Palm Oil Board is supporting the certification of independent smallholders by way of training and giving them financial support to prepare for certification. Transformation of the sector must include the participation of smallholders, for collectively they account for 40% of the global production of palm oil, and more than 3 million of them depend on oil palm as a source of livelihood. But smallholders have underperformed in terms of productivity and income, and certification for them has been very challenging, especially with regard to legality, application of best management practices, and traceability. At present, smallholders account for about 8% of the total production of CSPO, but only 0.6% of it is produced by what we call independent smallholders. So for smallholders, Should certification or improving livelihoods through improved productivity be a priority? Smallholders need support to become sustainable mainstream producers, and it's for this reason that RSPO is implementing their smallholder strategy. For Solidaridad, putting farmers first is a priority for us. Give opportunities for them for better livelihoods and food security. It is for this reason that Solidaridad has been actively involved in supporting oil palm smallholders in sustainable production in various producing regions in Africa, Latin America, and in Southeast Asia. In Indonesia, Solidaridad Indonesia has been supporting sustainable production of smallholders since 2016. A major project was on the improved livelihoods of smallholders in West Kalimantan, where Solidaridad was involved in capacity building, giving training on the ground, and preparing farmers for sustainable production to meet national standards. Currently, Solidaridad is one of the implementing partners in a national project called National Initiative for Sustainable and Climate Smart Oil Palm Smallholders, which is co-funded by the Netherlands. We are supporting the implementation of the National Sustainable Palm Oil Action Plan and also in capacity building of smallholders to meet requirements for ISPO certification. In Malaysia, Solidaridad has collaborated with the Malaysian Palm Oil Board on the promotion of palm oil sustainability since 2016. The collaboration focused on enhancing the effectiveness of MSPO standards and on capacity building and training of smallholders to prepare them for MSPO certification. Solidaridad is also an active member of the MSPO working group to review the standards for independent smallholders. Solidaridad is also an implementing partner for the national project on sustainable and climate-smart oil palm smallholders, which is being implemented by the governments of Malaysia and the Netherlands. In conclusion, the sustainability debate over palm oil is expected to continue and with increasing demands. But in my opinion, boycotting of palm oil is not an option. Good progress has been made in the production of certified sustainable palm oil based on the certification system RSPO, but uptake by the market has been poor to date. RSPO is the most widely accepted sustainability standard, but it is unlikely to fully transform the sector, and other voluntary standards and national standards are complementary and they are essential for the transformation of the sector. National standards are critical for raising the floor of sustainable performance, and national governments could provide an enabling environment to ensure that sustainable production happens in those countries. And lastly, inclusion of smallholders in the transformation of the sector is very critical. This concludes my presentation. Thank you for your kind attention.